record. All right, hi, I'm Teresa Ford, and I'm going to talk to you about how to make a smooth gradient. Here we have a postcard sized piece of paper. You can tell by the size of my hand. It is on an angle. I have a simple little towel roll here. Water flows downhill, so we are going to work from the top to the bottom with a nice little bead of water. We have to pre-mix all of our paint because we will not have time to make paint while we're going. So I have my full tray here. This is fairly gooey, thick paint. Some of it a little bit waterier than others because I was kind of rushing. An assortment of Daniel Smith and Schmeinecke, and there's a couple other brands hiding in here too. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. We're going to create a bead of water. I have my size 10 brush, which is probably a little bit small for this size paper, but that's what you said you were using. And this is fairly pointy, so that's going to be a little annoying, but we're going to work with it anyway. All right, I have my water bin. I have dirty water, clean water, and I have a towel to dry my brush off and damp my brush off. So when I'm going between colors, I am rinsing my brush really well, damping it off on that towel, picking up clean water, damping that off. All right, so that my brush is going to be fairly juicy because we want a bead of water. And what we're going to do is I'm going to pick up a lot of water and I'm going to go grab that first color. And we're going to have to work fairly fast because you don't want this to go. Oh, I just contaminated my purple. All right, so I'm on the tape. That's useful. All right, so I'm going to pick up that purple. And what you're seeing here, it's that pointy brush here, is that I have a solid bead of liquid across the bottom. You can see where it's a little bit thicker. That's where it's wet. You want that to stay wet. And when you come back and you touch it, you're going to be touching that bead of water as you go across. All right, so we're going to go down about how far we want the blue. And I've picked up my board, so I'm actually on more of a tilt than that paper because I've found that the bead is, you don't want the bead flowing upward at all. I'm going to clean my brush completely, and I'm going to pick up that blue. So now I have blue in my brush. And if I come back and I hit that bead and go across, now that bead has some blue and some purple in it. If I rinse the brush, pick up more of the blue, because I want straight blue. I don't want it to be purple at this point necessarily. And come across, now I have some blue. And that gives us a nice smooth transition from the purple to the blue. Now if you're finding that it's too sharp, if the line is too sharp, we can fix that up a little bit when we transition to the green. So let's pick up some green and put that in there. Pick up some green. And I'm actually going to go grab more green. And I'm cleaning my brush because I want green. I don't want blue. And I know when I touch this paper, I'm going to go up a little bit so I can get some green into that blue a little bit. All right. So you can see where that green is coming down. I like green, so I'm going to push it down a little bit farther. Anyway, my green is a granulating green. It's a green aptite, so it's going to have little specks in it like that. All right, green, and then we jump to yellow. And I come down here and throw some yellow in that. Make it nice and even so it's the same shade of yellow going across. Rinse my brush. Make sure it's clean in the clean water. Pick up more of that yellow. And that green is really strong, and it's going to take a little bit to get to a strong yellow. So I might pick up some of this green out of here. So I dried off my brush, and I'm just picking up the bead a little bit so we don't have that full bead there. It had an awful lot of green in it. And then I'm going to pick up more of that yellow and put that bead back in strong yellow. All right. Pick up a little bit more yellow. And so that bead is slowly transitioning from green to yellow. That yellow is very enthusiastic. It's pulling upward, which is kind of funny. All right, and then we have a different shade of yellow, kind of an orangey gold yellow. Let's go pull that down a little let's do another set of that just because we can. You do need a full tape on your paper all the way around, because otherwise your paper is going to bead up and do different things, and it may drip the wrong direction on you. And I want a little bit more of that. That's a pretty color, whatever that is. There we go. And red. There we go. With some red into that. And honestly, I might go up just a little bit. And with a clean brush. Note that if you're going up at all, it's going to do weird stuff to you. And you can get back bleeds that are wrong. Whee! So you really should not ever go back up. You can demo and what not to do here. Pick up a little bit more of this gold. More of that gold. Note, every time I am putting down the correct paint color. I'm not... See, if you go back and forth, up and down, it's going to do weird blendies on you. Pull that bead back down. Again, you're working with the wet edge. In a lot of watercolor, they talk about where your wet edge is, and you want to keep that wet edge wet. Let me pull this up a little bit. All right, so we're at the bottom of the paper, and when we get to the bottom, we're going to have this bead across the bottom that you don't want to leave there. If you leave that there, it's going to, as it dries, that water is going to push back up and do weird stuff to the bottom of your paint. And so what you want to do is dry off your brush and pick it up. And you actually want to make a really small, like a 1/16 of an inch, eighth of an inch, white area across the bottom of the page, which seems kind of screwy because you don't want to leave a white spot at the bottom of your page. But what's going to happen is as that paint dries, as it pulls, it is going to drip down into that space and fill it up. And so you don't want to have anything that's going to push back. The same thing for the sides. You don't want to have anything on the sides. If I were to touch anywhere up here, okay, even with just a damp dry brush, what's going to happen is it's going to put down water, and that water is going to push the paint around and make a bloom that you don't necessarily want. And in fact, you can see where I went back. I'm going to turn my brush around so I'm not going to hit it. All right, where I went back up a little bit, it's got a weird push to the water consistency. This green being granulating is also very different from this yellow, and so the two are not necessarily going to blend very well together. And you can see even here it was a little bit too wet along the edge. Let me move over here. And so that blue crawled up along the tape line and went back up. Do not try to fix this while it is wet. That is a bad thing to do. And you can tell it's wet by, let me get this off of here before it drips. All right, I don't want anything to drip. All right, you can tell it's wet because it's bubbly. My paper has just a bit of an arc to it, even though it was taped down fully. There's an arc. And you want to let that go. You can hit it with a heat gun. If you hit it with a heat gun, be advised, that tape is going to come right up because the tape and the heat are going to dissolve each other. Well, the heat's going to dissolve the tape. So if I take my heat gun, I can technically speed dry it, but if you do that, you lose some of the mixing that's going to happen as the water moves around the paper and dries the paint. So you don't necessarily want to be using a heat gun to speed up the drying process. You actually want the pieces to move together. And when it is completely dry, you can come back. Note, I am not letting this untilt. You do not want to push it horizontal. You want to keep it on that angle because you know that the water is flowing down and you want it to flow down. You want it to fill up the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and heat gun it because I'm lazy. Impatient is the correct word. All right. If you see a bubble at all, it's still wet. If your paper is arcing at all, if when you touch it, if it feels cool, it is still wet. I can feel there's a little bit of a bump right here, but it's dry enough that I really don't care about it. This seems really harsh to me. We could try to even it out, or we can just say, hey, it's watercolor, we're gonna live with it. If you wanted to try evening it out, you want to grab a sturdy brush. These brushes are very soft, which is really nice. However, my favorite sturdy brush is this guy right here that is, who knows what, Maxine's Mop of, I can't read that. I think it's a low Cornell mop. I don't know that they make them anymore, but it's slightly stiffer. The bristles, it's still a watercolor brush, so it's still soft, but the bristles are just a wee touch stiffer. So I can wet that, and I am going to wet it with a soft brush. And I am going to wet the whole thing. You don't want to wet one part and work with just one part, because what's going to happen is that water is going to dry unevenly and push the pigment. So I wet the whole thing. Whoa. And that green is lifting. So a lot of this is your paint transparent or not, or permanent or not. And in fact, that'll soften it out a little bit. Whee! Yeah. And I can tell that whatever that yellow is a little bit on the stiff side, so I can scrub it with this brush and lift the paint a little bit that way and pull that back up. All right. These other colors lifted all over the place and kind of made a mess, but yeah, whatever. All right, again, it's flowing downhill. And we want it to flow downhill so we know where the bead of water is, so we can lift that off so it doesn't do any blooms on us. So we can come back down here and just pick that off. And I'm using a dry brush, clean dry brush, to lift off that bottom edge. And in fact, what I've done in the past is a paper towel. Let me grab my paper towels here. Keep your paper towels handy. Use paper towels that do not have a pattern on them, don't have any texture to them, like a Viva paper towel, so you don't leave behind any pattern in your watercolor. But we can lift this off. But the tricks to remember here is that you want your painting, you want all of your paint to be pre-mixed with enough of it. You may end up with too much, so I ended up with some extra paint, and my blue is very enthusiastic there. That's that indigo. So you may have extra, but it's better to have extra than not enough, because you cannot get the right consistency while you're zipping along really fast. Because you note, I went really fast on this particular exercise because I wanted to keep that wet edge. I wanted that bead to move down the paper, shifting slowly as I went. Heat gun, keep it moving around your paper. If you leave it in one spot too long, it is going to burn your paper and leave a really pretty brown spot in the middle of your painting. And this is way too wet. I can feel the bubble, so it's still too wet. Please hold. Okay. The heat gun also makes the paper warm, which, you know, we can expect. However, if you paint on top of that while it is warm, and I can feel some significant heat on this, it will cause your paint to dry faster, which you don't necessarily want. So I'm going to wave this in the air a little bit, cool it down. because I want to fix this purple. This purple blue I don't like. And again, you have to wet the whole thing. You cannot leave it the way it is. And if I spritz it, if I were to use a spritzer, I know somebody recommended on the Facebook feed using a spritzer. If I were to spritz it, it's going to leave little drops of water. And I don't necessarily want little drops of water. And at this point, I would honestly switch to a much larger brush to wet this paper, because that little streak with that green immediately lifting, that green's going to pull down. However, here we go, because that's what we have. We have a size 10 brush. We're going to rip right through here. We are wetting the whole thing. Note that I am cleaning the brush as I move down because I don't want to pull down the color. All right, so I've wet the whole page. I think I got everywhere. Let me quick tilt around and look. Yeah, I got the whole thing. All right, I'm going to come back with this purple at the top and come into that blue. And I'm going to actually add some of that blue into this purple up here so that it looks a little bit more even. Now, it was a little bit wetter than it should have been. When I sweeped in the blue, it was just a little bit wet, and I don't want it to bloom, so I'm being very careful. See, there it is, I dripped. You can see the drip. I don't want that drip. Let's see if it'll let me lift it off without too much issue. All right. There we go. But note, my paper is starting to dry because it was a little bit warm. And so therefore, I have to re-wet it all the way to the bottom. You want to make sure that there's nowhere that's dry next to wet, because that will leave a bloom. All right, I have puddles along the edge that are going to back bleed in. So I'm going to take my paper towel, straight down the edge, because my tape's been lifting off from the heat gun, so it's leaving a bit of a gap, which is causing the paint to collect. So I'm just going to sweep down, picking up the excess water all the way around. All right, I'm going to do the same down this side. And I'm pressing because I want to squeegee the water out from underneath the tape, because you don't want that water coming back in. And that will give you a nice smooth gradient, which, let me dry that so you can see how dark it is. If your paper is wet, if you do the wet on wet, if your paper is wet, you have to use a much stronger pigment. If your paper is dry, you can use a little bit more watery pigment than you otherwise would. It depends on how dark you want your end result to be. This is dry enough. You can see where the tape has started to mudgy up. I'm going to go ahead and rip the tape off. When you take your tape off, please don't ever pull it straight up. Don't pull straight up. You pull down and at an angle away from your paper like this. Less chance of ripping your paper that way. Not leave paint on the board. My tape wasn't really well taped down because I moved it over so it would fit in the camera lens better. All right. So we end up with a really nice smooth gradient. That blue going back up along the purple kind of bugs me, but and it did it on both sides. That's because the indigo, I think, and the purple were different consistency a little bit, and it did crawl up. It was a little bit wetter in the blue than the purple was, and so it pushed up along the tape. In any case, we can see it actually looks pretty good as far as a little gradient goes. Nice and even transitions between the two. Now, if you wanted to, grab another sheet of paper, tape it down. Incidentally, taping down your paper, dot your corners. Do, 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 do. I like sound effects. All right. And what that does is it lets you see where to put the tape without having to guess. You can say, oh, it goes right there, definitely. Straight paper. Push your tape down from the inside to the outside edges so it doesn't bubble. Okay, there's the dot. There's the dot. From the inside out. Make sure it's nice and solid. From the inside out. From the inside out, push it down. Okay, nice and solid. If we were to wet this first, let me find my spritzer. If we wet this first, we can see that it'll turn out a lot lighter, and we'll have a harder time controlling where the drips happen. Okay, so I'm giving it a good solid drippiness here. And then I don't want anywhere that's more wet than other areas. So I'm actually going to take my damp dry brush and go over the whole thing with just water. Whee! Like so. Both directions. Like so. As a general rule, don't push your brush tip across the paper because you'll destroy your tip on your brush. All right, here we go. And my purple has a bit of blue in it. We're just going to roll right down the page. Notice I have to be a little bit faster. It's going to be a lot wetter. It's going to be a lot drippier. And let's see. Here we go. Going down a little bit. Clean it. Again, really fast here. That yellow is not nearly strong enough and I didn't make enough. All right. I have officially run out of the nice thick yellow here. So we're going to end up jumping to that other color pretty fast here. There we go. Note that because the paper was wet, notice that we're getting streaky lines up at the top. All right. Now, it is still very, very, very wet, which means we have the ability, if we wanted to, we could come back up. But if I touch up here, what's going to happen is it's just going to drip and make an uneven mess. So to control that, you make sure your brush is damp dry and pick it up a little bit because you don't want to be adding any water back up top. Nowhere. All right, and we got to prevent that back bleed. Pick up across the bottom. I'm picking up more than I did the other time because it is so wet. Let me get some of this off, squeegee out some of the water. Did you see that glob of water come out of the tape? That was exciting. All right. In fact, I can see under the tape at the bottom, I can see paint. So that paint, because it was so wet, it just soaked right underneath the tape. Whee! You have to make sure that you're leaving a white area. Notice that it's going to slowly fill in. Again, dry it on an angle. You know which direction the paint is flowing. You know where your puddles are going to form. And just let it be. And let it be enthusiastic. I feel like I had a lot more control over the gradients over here, although I did get a much sharper line on it. So for these guys, they kind of talk to each other. I'm not really fond of this mix. I think these two paints just weren't that compatible. And in fact, even in this one, you can see that that blue just kind of disappeared. I am not going to go back and try to add that blue right now. If I do that, it is just going to poof out and bloom out all over the place and make a mess. However, I feel like I should do it just so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so suppose I pick up a little bit of blue. I say I want some blue right here. This paper is still glistening, it's still wet, but it's drying. And so when I add that blue back in, even if I go up and down, immediately you can see where the water is starting to push into that green and make a mess. Oh, but I dripped. That's even more impressive. All right. I can kind of fake it if I want to go over the whole thing again. But because it's already wet, we have issues. We're getting gappy looking space here. It's getting murky through here. We're getting weird beading through here that shouldn't be there. We're just getting weird stuff. I'm gonna make more of that yellow as long as we're showing mistakes. All right, pause and make more yellow. All right, if I come back in here, add some of that yellow. Note I am going right over the edge of the tape. I'm not trying to stay in the lines I wouldn't want to. It's just too persnickety to do that. And I officially ran out of that other orangey yellow too. So I'll grab some more of that, doing what you should never do, which is go straight from the little well to the paper. I can talk about all kinds of mistakes you can do with watercolor. Here you go, a little bit of red. But note, if I hadn't gone over the whole painting again, it would really get bloomy and weird. Note, if I start going back up, I start getting weirder, murky colors. Note the purple is dripping down into the blue. I've lost my nice gradient line through here because it just wasn't controllable with the paper being wet. And the fact that I went back over it again, that never does help. While it is wet, never redo things. Note, when we did multiple layers on this, we re-wet the whole thing after it was completely dry and then came back to it again. So let's pick up the edge of that. Whee! Oh yeah, look, it made a green edge down the side. Let's make a matching one on this side. Here we go. Whee! All right. That was a delightful sound. And we do not want a balloon of water up here. Note that because the paper is so wet, it is significant, I can't tilt it without messing up too badly, but it is significantly bubbled right here, which means even on a tilt, it's flowing, the paint is flowing in that direction on that bubble. And it's beading up across here because there's a bubble here and pushing down. So that paint is going to flow downhill. And even if you're on a significant tilt, if there's a bubble, that paint's going to go opposite sides of that bubble and pull and start to bead and collect in different spots. So we end up with that. Anyway, let's dry this off and call it done. Whee! Also note, because we started with really wet paper, it takes a lot longer for this paper to dry. And it's still very bumpy. Let's see, is it possible to show that? Yeah, you can see where it's bumpy. Hopefully my recording is still going. My computer went into sleep mode. Yeah, maybe it was still recording. It's hard to say. In any case, I dried it a little bit more. Here we go. Peel that off. Don't reuse tape either. It seems wasteful, but if you do, your painting is just not going to stick. It's not going to be a good seal on your paper. Let me lift that up and wipe the board down. Because I don't want to set it back down in water. All right, and this is still wet a bit. You can see how it's warped. If we look at the back of this one, it's slightly less warped. I mean, there's still some warping, but you can always bend around your paper. But you can see the two different styles. Let me turn it around here so they match. You can see you get a little bit more control over your blending with just the bead on dry paper. If you do wet paper and go down, it can start doing strange mixing on you, and you can get that bubble where, notice how it's darker right here than it is right here. And even though it was tilted the whole time, the paint still flowed because of how the paper was bubbling because it was wet. All right, and because the paper was wet, my pigment was not strong enough for wet paper, so it's a little bit more washed looking than it was over here. In any case, there you go. My commentary on how to do a gradient. Anyway, have fun, have a good day, and enjoy your watercolor. It's all play and fun.